And I believe you're presenting with Chief Dodds and Chief Tanzola.
I'll weigh in if necessary, yes.
Okay. Yeah, we had a big long meeting. We went through all this. Yeah.
Unlike his predecessors who only considered it like more than him, was only concerned about the issues.
You don't need a mic.
Many neighborhoods within the city of Austin suffer from severe emergency response time deficiencies. And these citizens living in these deficient areas, as well as policymakers, are many times unaware that this is the case. The citizens of Austin trust their firefighters, so we need to be honest with them. We need to be honest with them when we're doing well, and we, most importantly, need to be honest with them when we can do better. I will be presenting you tonight a presentation or methodology to reduce emergency response time deficiencies. This plan is holistic in that it examines a broad range of emergency response deficiencies causes, and it will provide, by way of a council resolution, a practical solution for each one of these causes. The fire chief is supportive of this plan. In fact, the Austin Firefighters Association and the fire chief staff have worked hand in glove over the last 6-month period to develop these solutions. However, for these solutions to be implemented, it will require council action. So at the end of this presentation, I will be asking you to support us by recommending to council that they adopt our proposed resolution.
Chief Nix, if I could right here, I'd like to, just for a minute, kind of explain why he and I are up here presenting together. The Austin Firefighter Association and the Austin Fire Department, last budget year, we were presenting the need for staffing for a fire station down on Brody Lane in the Shady Hollow neighborhood. At that time, the Austin City Council asked us if we could go away and over the course of this year come up with a unified model, because at that meeting we were presenting from two different perspectives, two models that were leading us to the same conclusion. But they said, why don't you get together and see if you can come up with a unified model that will express the need that you're talking about at that time. So that's what we have done. We took our subject matter experts from the association, we brought our planning and research experts from the Austin Fire Department, and we met in a series of meetings that are going to result in the model that you're going to see today. This model will be used by both the association and the fire department. But the Austin Fire Department plans to use this model to work with city management to address the challenges that are going to be a byproduct of this model. And we're going to address it using many of the things Chief Nix will talk about today. But we plan to do that in a very collaborative fashion, and we expect city management to be very receptive, as they have in the past. And we think many of the innovative approaches to be considered and hopefully utilized as we move into the solution of some of the challenges that are facing us. All right, Chief Nix.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Austin's experienced 38% growth over the last 15 years. There are certain estimates by the Urban Institute that we will see an additional 30 to 80% growth in the Austin area in the next 15 years. Austin currently has an 8-minute response time goal. This goal does not set a particularly high bar for response time standards. In fact, it's more lenient than a community standard adopted by Council in 1986 for response times. Even with this goal, a small and shrinking area of the city of Austin is meeting our response time goals. Fire station deficiencies in critical areas certainly lead to part of this problem, but there are other factors that also lead to this problem we'll be discussing and addressing in this presentation. This graphic shows the 4 time segments that comprise the 8-minute goal. And so if you look here, this is where the time the clock starts after 911 takes the call and is passed off to either fire or to EMS. This is where the time starts. There's a period to process the call, a period to dispatch the call, a turnout time when the firefighters or the EMS personnel are getting to the rig and getting ready, and then a travel time component. And the time stops whenever Austin Fire, whenever Auto Aid Partners, or EMS is first on scene. Our proposed solution endeavors to address all 4 of the time segments. The proposed council resolution specifically addresses the travel time component. This is a really important map legend I need to talk about before I show you the next map. If you look at the colored areas, this dark green area is the area that we are meeting our response time goals. I'll show you this map in a minute, and they're also in your presentations packets. All the other colors represent different degrees of emergency response time deficiencies, with the tan color, the red color, and the purple color being particularly troubling. So here is a map of our standards of coverage for 2015. And as you can see, these are the only areas in the city where we're meeting our goal at this time, these dark green areas. And so if you look back at this map, you can see they're particularly around the periphery. The further you get away from the core, where annexation and growth has occurred over the last 15, 20 years, we're getting further and further behind in meeting our goals.
And also, I'd like to interject that the lighter green areas would not necessarily be areas we would recommend new fire stations be placed, but they are areas that are experiencing some challenge in meeting the 8-minute standard, and there might be other solutions to address the response issues we have there.
Yeah, and I think some of the solutions we have in our plan will address some of the light green areas. A lot of times light green areas can be caused from a unit having to respond to another area where there's a deficiency call and somebody else is already handling the call there, and so it kind of is a cascading effect. That's why you have to have kind of a holistic approach to this to try to solve the issue. So does time matter? Of course it does. I'm not going to spend too much on this time on this. I think it's fairly intuitive. But in terms of medical calls, for each minute delay, your chance of survival in a heart attack situation drops 7 to 10%. In terms of fires grow exponentially. There's lots of current literature and research on the new materials inside of house fires and how much faster they burn, how much faster they grow, and how much faster the smoke spreads and the flame spread and how toxic that smoke is. So if we expect good outcomes in terms of saving lives and property, we certainly have to have people respond and get on scene quickly. So a little history. We were in this exact same situation in the mid-'80s where we were behind in building fire stations and we were not meeting our response time goal. And Council took action in 1986, and they passed 2 resolutions, which are in your packets. One was to build 6 fire stations as soon as practical. The other one was to adopt a 3-minute response travel time. Now, right now, with our current standard, we're actually contemplating a 4-minute time. So we actually had a more stringent community standard back in '86. Shortly after this, the Austin Fire Department started trying to come up with a data-driven, proactive way for the timing, placement, and location of fire stations. And there's a city planner we have with us today that we hired to be our expert on this and helped us work through these issues with the staff, Pete Spiesma. I probably hurt your name. He's worked for the city since 1971. He's worked for the fire department for 19 years up to 2003. And he developed a kind of a nationally accepted utility model that used about 8 variables, and he placed these variables. Actually, he looked at service areas within the city, small polygons defined by natural and man-made barriers, and about a 3-minute response time for a station to get to these different areas of this polygon. Then he would capture statistics and within each one of those areas, he would use those statistics to determine proactively where we would need our stations in the future. So we used that model for some time after the resolution to build the 6 fire stations. What management labor has done over the last 6 months is we've revalidated that model in terms of both data and assumptions. And Pete's been working along with Christine Tees and the staff. And I'd like to compliment the chief and her staff. It has truly been a collaborative effort. Every decision was reached through discussion and looking at data and drawing these conclusions. And in the end, we were all feel very comfortable with the conclusions we drew. In this new model, we're calling the Fire Service Delivery Analysis Model. And this is just a little snippet of that resolution from 1986. You can see the 6 fire stations in this. That's in your packet also. The reason I'm putting it in there, we kind of constructed this new resolution, this proposed resolution, using some of the same wording from 1986. So what causes fire response deficiencies? The first 2 items, lack of fire stations and traffic congestion, we will be addressing, our proposed solution will be addressed in our proposed resolution to council. And the last two items, what we're hoping to do is form a management, labor, and possibly even a citizen committee, and maybe even invite members of the commission to be a part of that, to explore and find opportunities to further reduce response times. Again, it has to be a holistic approach. It can't just be building fire stations. There's a lot more to this than just that. And so this is a really important slide because it explains the new fire service delivery analysis. And so if you look at this piece of map on the left-hand side, you see these polygon areas I referred to earlier. They're different shaped, and these shapes are based on natural and man-made barriers, roads, rivers, railways, things like this. In the middle of some of these polygons, you'll see a black dot. That's where an existing Austin fire station is. And where you don't see a black dot, these are what we used to call service areas, now we're calling fire zones. And these are polygons which we are accumulating statistics within to determine risk, and determine the rank of where these stations should be placed in the future and when they should be placed in the future. And so if you look at the model method on the right-hand side, if you go down to item 2, you'll see the data elements we're accumulating.
Chief Hicks,
Yes, sir.
and the size of those are based on travel time, is that correct?
They're based on travel time of 3 to 4 minutes, and 4 trying to be the maximum amount. Yes, sir. And so the data we're accumulating is these 4 elements: percentage of area developed, residential population, employee population, and square footage of all property. And we're using square footage instead of property value because there is income disparities across the city, and it seemed like a more appropriate way to measure risk. And then that basically develops a list. Basically, this data is worked into a coefficient, and there's negative and positive numbers in that coefficient. All positive numbers go on a list. Then that service area list is re-ranked based on what I call urgency factors of existing response times and existing run volumes. And so that will give you a ranked list of the most critically needed stations. And when you do all of that, you end up with a map that looks something like the one on the screen. And you'll see 16 stations here, and I'm going to kind of toggle back and forth here really quick. If you toggle back and forth and look at the standards coverage map, you'll see that these 16 stations, it's not quite to scale, kind of cover the areas of our most severe response time deficiencies. Not every one of these stations is needed today. Some will be needed in the future, but this is a way to project that. In the purple are the most critically needed stations, are needed immediately. The tan areas are stations that are kind of on the horizon that will be needed sometime in the future. So the resolution, there's actually 6 purple areas there, but we're only asking the resolution to research and fund 5 of these stations. I'll explain why here in the next slide. So here are the 5 stations that's in the resolution listed that we need immediately. And we're crossing out this Manchac Slaughter Station for now, and the reason is that Manchac Slaughter Area Station is in this number 3 polygon right here, kind of at the bottom of our standards coverage map. And we'll be placing a station in service this year right adjacent to that polygon 3. And there'll be another station, Onion Creek Station, will be coming online hopefully in 2017. So we think these 2 stations will have a positive effect on this polygon area. Now, because that area is big enough, in time as we get more density, we probably will need a fire station there, but we're not looking at it as a most critical station today because of those reasons. So the resolution contemplates several solutions, and the main part of it is not just building 5 fire stations. The main part of it is developing a methodology that's repeatable every budget year. And what the resolution would do is we would bring an updated fire service analysis model to the city manager each year, labor and management. He would present that in open session to council. Now we're giving the policymakers really good data-driven decisions to make decisions moving forward on where we need to place and time fire stations. Part of the resolution contemplates the city manager will have a plan, always for the top 5 on the list. That doesn't mean they'll all be funded that particular year. It could be some of them funded 10 years from now, but we have a plan discussed in open session that allows the citizens in some of these deficient areas to also have input. So we think that's very important. We're also asking him to do things I think would affect the green areas quite a bit, and that is look at GPS signal preemption, which I'll explain in future slides. But one of the very important things, and it almost seems like a minor thing, but it's probably the most important thing of this system, and it can't work without it, is we have to have a funding mechanism other than what we're using today. Currently, we're using a funding mechanism that basically we've been relying on general obligation bonds. And so let's just take this last bond as an example. 2012, the citizens voted in a general obligation bond. We had a station funded in that bond. We asked for 6 stations, had 1 funded. Okay, that 1 station is still not built today. In fact, it hasn't even gone out to bid to be built today. So we need a way to engage the private sector where we can help where they can help us design, build, and finance our stations over perhaps a 15-year period, where we can use budget adjustments to pay for these stations, not have to wait for general bond obligations in the future. So this is a really important part of this methodology, is if we identify them, but we can never get to the point where we can fund them, we're going to be in the same situation we are today.
And Chief, let me jump in here. The Shady Hollow station that we're going to have staffing that the City Council funded for us starting in June of this year, it's not exactly a public-private partnership, but it is an example of what can be done with creative thinking. That station was built by a MUD, a municipal utility district, and it was used by an emergency services district for a time period. But when it was set up, it was under the understanding the Austin Fire Department at some time in the future, when that area around it was annexed, would actually take possession of that station. So this was put in place years in advance of when we would actually need it. We are exercising an option in the lease on that building to move in about 5 years before we would actually need to be there by the contract, but it's going to provide response to one of the areas you saw on the map down there that Chief Nix referred to. So we know that there are different ways of looking at building fire stations, acquiring fire stations and buildings that can be used. So we think that creative thinking on the city management part that's already been exhibited, and then looking forward for an institutionalized way of putting this into practice will allow us to be very successful with being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar as we move forward when trying to meet the response challenges that we face.
Just 2 quick questions. Why, I guess first off, why do you believe that this project hasn't even gone out to bid? And then 2, what other cities are doing these private-public partnerships to build fire departments?
Well, I'm really not
So,
prepared to talk about why it hasn't gone to bid, but I mean it's a common lag time we have when we're building fire stations. I don't think this is too far out of the norm from what we've seen in the past. I think when a bond election comes forward, I'll speculate. The bond election forward is a variety of things on. It takes time for Public Works to work through and get the work done, and I would believe it's probably something along those lines. Public-private partnerships are a new emerging thing. They've done a lot more in California than Texas. We're starting to emerge in more municipalities here. It's lately became a buzzword around City Hall, so it's not just coming from us. And it seems like a great opportunity for funding in a unique and, hopefully a faster and cheaper way.
And again, I mean, we're trying to learn from history, and we're just kind of take the experience we've had in the past and just not duplicate it going forward. We're in the process of the final plans are being finalized for that station. It'll be going out for bid, and then construction should be starting in early 17. But we're just trying not to repeat that. We'd like to speed that process up.
So, Commissioner, to answer your question specifically, the construction progress is approaching the 90th percentile review stage, with the expectation that it'll be out for bid this summer. And then they're expected to break ground by December is the slated time period.
And so, and I don't want to be critical of anybody in this. It's just a system we've used, and we need a different system. The chief has done a very apt job of informing the budget office that we need fire stations. And I think the approach, you have to ask them, I think the approach has been, well, let's wait for a general bond election. General bond elections, maybe rightfully so, kind of become wish lists for council. A lot of times, critical infrastructure not included. And so we just need to have a more creative way to do this if we're going to accomplish what we need to, especially with the increased growth coming in the future. I got ahead of myself earlier, but now I want to talk about the resolution also asks city manager to report back on the cost and feasibility of GPS emergency vehicle preemption systems. And what these systems will do is they will know the location of the apparatus, the rate of speed of the apparatus, the proposed route to the emergency scene, and it will clear the traffic lights in advance of the emergency apparatus getting to that scene. So it'll turn the light green soon enough so traffic clears, in theory. So by the time the apparatus gets there, they'll be able to go through the intersection very rapidly. This is a really holistic thing across the city that probably gives us the most bang for our buck across the city. And I think it will take some of those lighter green areas and turn them green if we can implement this on a pretty wide scale. I got a couple fact sheets on that in your presentation if you want to go through it more. Other factors to reduce response time, I have some listed here. I'm not going to go through them individually because I'm a little behind on my time. What we want to do is form a management, labor, and possibly public safety commission subcommittee to look at some of these opportunities. I really believe that we can squeeze out some more time if we get together and do that. And where time matters, we need to be doing everything we can. So it's an invite. I know Tom has agreed to do this with labor, and we'd love to have some input from citizens and from this commission to work through those issues. And the next steps are really, the next step for us is really getting our proposed resolution approved. I want to talk about what it is really quick. What it is, it's a process or methodology. That'll be repeated every budget year, but the city manager will place that analysis model in front of council. The policymakers then have a data-driven way to make informed decisions, and it'll be done in open session. That's really the biggest part of this resolution. What it does not do is obligate council to a timeline for building stations. It does not require any future budgetary expenditures. Every time an expenditure is made, it'll be a decision of the policymaker, and it'll go forward from there. But the resolution does not necessitate that. That is my presentation. I would like to ask your support in recommending to council to adopt our proposed resolution, and I stand ready for questions.
Chief, do you have anything to add?
No, other than just in conclusion, we consider this a very important collaboration that we had with the AFA on this project. And coming up with this model we think is going to be extremely valuable with informing city management as well as the policymakers on the council with, as Chief Nick said, with data that's going to help them drive their decision making in the expenditure of taxpayer dollars. And again, just finally, from our perspective, Chief Nix is asking for a resolution. What I'll be doing with this information, and the fire chief and her executive team will be taking this to the city manager's office and using it, as we have been for a period of time now, to explore the different options for designing, for financing, and for building fire stations, and for meeting the emergency response challenges that exist in various parts of the city. So thank you for your time, and I'm here to answer questions also.
Okay, commissioners. Commissioner Levy?
On private public partnerships.
Yes, sir.
In New York, high-rise buildings have been built over and around new fire stations.
That's correct.
We have not, I think this fire department has suggested that with new high-rises downtown because we still have the same number of firefighters we had in 1970, and that wasn't adopted. But we do have areas, developments where that are being proposed and discussed now where it would be possible for land, construction, so forth, to be part of council approval of a new development. Would that be a safe statement?
That would be a safe statement.
Okay. Second of all, as I understand it, we have fire stations that could be moved where we don't need them. They were basically designed, are placed based on how fast it took the horses to get there. For instance, the station on Blanco was originally a horse-drawn station. Next door to the station is where they kept the hay, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's roughly correct.
It would be
you're talking about the core of the city, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. It would be politically difficult because those neighborhoods like the stations, but I think we need to keep in mind that there are stations here that are placed for political reasons and not for based on the analysis that you all have made. Safe statement?
That would be a safe statement. I would say it's the Chief Nix mentioned there's some timelines, and the date he mentioned of the last resolution was 30 years ago. Well, that's a long time. The city's changed a lot in 30 years. Well, you can imagine when those stations were built in the early 1900s how much it's changed. So any methodology we came up with looking at our response time today absolutely would be fresh eyes looking at the situation, and it would influence our decision making.
One last question. Brian, one of the things, in terms of compressing times, that dispatch bar is wrong. And when they punch the button, when a call taker enters the address and punches the button, the CAD system begins a long process going through an algorithm of what equipment should be dispatched. Is that correct?
In summary, yes, sir.
Yeah, and it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's longer than simply the old method of simply opening up boxes around the station and announcing the fine.
Actually, we did some work about 2 years ago, and we're able to shave close to 45 seconds off of our dispatch time through the automated process. So I think going back to a manual process would substantially increase the dispatch time.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting got 45 seconds with new or better technology. Is it possible to shave more than 45 seconds off the time?
I believe that I commit that we continue to look at that, and I think that we will probably find additional areas to save some time if
I would hope
possible.
that would be part of any resolution. Chair, this is considered an action item, but what could we do?
We can vote on the proposed resolution. There's language.
Okay.
Just next to the wildfire planning language is the Austin Firefighters Association proposed resolution. 2 pages. Sorry, 3. Further questions, Commissioner Worsham?
Lost you. First off, this, our compliment, or my compliments on giving us all a strong basis for trying to remove politics from some of these decision-making processes, and this is a pretty strong effort. Keeping in mind that this group has to compete for resources with every other group like this in town. As I understand it, the top of the 3rd page of the resolution, I think it's the third resolution paragraph, is really geared toward making sure that this issue gets a hearing before council and doesn't get somehow sidetracked or lost at the city. I'm not pointing fingers. The city manager level or the city level as part of the budget process. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's correct. And we don't really want to point fingers either. It's just a process that's not working. And what the chief has actually done a very apt job every year of working with the planners and the assistant chiefs and bringing forward a list of stations that are needed. And very seldom does that get to council. So this would contemplate this analysis that we do, updated each year, being presented by the city manager to council with a plan for the top 5 ranked stations each year. Okay. And then the policymakers can discuss it. The policymakers can actually re-rank that list based on their own factors of their district also, if it's their pleasure.
In the past, you may have felt the need for 5 stations, but the budget presented to council may have contained 1 or 0, or wait till the next bond issue or that type of thing.
That's correct.
This would be, if this were adopted by council, it would be council's directive to staff to present the results of this model as it comes out of the model actually to the council in open session, as opposed to potentially having it get dropped prior to the council.
That's correct. And again, I think it's important. It doesn't obligate council to make any of those decisions. The policymakers still make the decisions, but they have better data in which to do so.
Right. Okay. I'm all for that, and certainly all for the technology that you mentioned, the signal prioritization. That to me seems like low-hanging fruit that we can get
You get a lot of bang for your buck there.
pretty quickly. Oh, and then just the one final thing was that I picked up on your comment. The 2012 bond money may go to construction bid in 2016. So if we're thinking that we're going to rely on the bonding process, and our next bonding opportunity might be, did you mention 2018? Or whenever it comes up?
Yeah,
So we're talking about 2022. We're
right.
talking about 6 years from now, maybe the next bond-funded station after the one that gets built this year, if we stay in that mode.
Relying on bonds has been a failed system, and I'm not trying to point fingers. It doesn't. There's no profit in
Not
that,
necessary.
but it doesn't work. And so, all this great work of creating a data-driven model and getting it to the council members will all be for naught if we can't have a way to fund better than we are today.
They could put a station in place and operational tomorrow or the next day if council approved firefighters, because I think one of the things that both the association and the fire department have agreed upon is that there can be temporary housing with double wide trailers. Basically, a fire station's a dormitory and a garage. And I think the association said it was agreeable to have, until the station could be built, to house personnel in a double wide and a shed for the apparatus, and that could be done tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yeah, if that ends up being the model we have to use to provide better service to citizens that need it in these deficient areas, then the firefighters absolutely will do that. Now, I hope eventually we'll build some stations and upgrade the conditions, but the most important thing is, are we serving the citizens, and are we doing it when they need it? And so whatever we need to do that, we'll be amenable to.
Yeah. So right now, the keyhole that we're trying to push these stations through is the capital cost up front. And as I understand it, the private part of the public-private partnership you're talking about is really just funding the upfront cost of the stations, right? It's not.
Yeah.
I guess it could be sharing buildings, wherever, but
Well,
but you're just talking about.
That's correct. That's essentially what we're talking about. That is the big impediment to a fire station. It's just the upfront cost of
We
the
don't have to
construction.
build retail above it or whatever. I mean, this is just a way to fund it now and then pay with a revenue stream in a way that's other than us, the city, taking on.
And I've
Exactly.
met with enough people in the private sector to let you know there is great interest in this. It is done in other places. You won't. It's not just finance. You'll also probably save money. Most likely save money in the build also. And so, it's a big part of this methodology. If we don't adopt that piece, the other parts might be
just
for
for your
naught.
information, the fire department and the city manager's office have been in discussions about the public-private partnerships for a number of months, and the discussions have moved from the general concept of it, can we do it, to now we're moving into discussions with real estate on how do we go about doing it. So this is a very viable option as far as city management is concerned.
Bill, in terms when a developer wants to put in a new development, they have to put in infrastructure anyway, streets,
Right.
sewers. It's possible and parks. You could put in a fire station as part of the agreement with the city. We want a fire station too.
I have just a few brief questions. And Commissioner Levy mentioned that we have the same amount of firefighters downtown that we had many years ago, but we have many more people living downtown. It's much more dense, and people are living higher up.
That's correct.
So does this response time model reflect what it truly takes to respond downtown to locations? Because I noticed of your 5 locations, you don't have a downtown station identified yet. But
Right.
so how does that factor into all this?
So I think what you're asking is about the vertical
Yes.
challenge to us. And right now, our response model is based on the apparatus travel from the station to the front of the building. So you're correct. If there was somebody having a medical emergency on the 27th floor, it does not reflect the time it takes for the firefighters to get from ground up to the 27th floor. And that vertical challenge is increasing in Austin every day. And so back to Commissioner Levy's statements earlier, the infill is what we call that. The infill needs of the city of Austin could drive the need for an additional station downtown or additional resources And the speed to get them up and down in the high rises is always going to be a challenge. So the closer we are to the front door before we have to go vertical, the faster we're going to get up to that floor.
So I just want to verify, under this system that we're proposing here possibly today, council and the city manager or the department have the flexibility over time. For example, if you identify that that vertical need is so great and you do need another station downtown, perhaps you can work in agreement with the developer to put a station on the ground floor. The next budget year, they can switch the station priority if they need to and decide they want to put a downtown station in that versus the 5.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the beauties of the model that we've developed is it should take all these qualities into account in a dynamic way so that from year to year, those colors you saw up there could change. If we had, for some reason, had some kind of massive development hit in a certain area of town, it might drive the need for that area over some of the other existing areas. So the priority could shift based on the model. And then, of course, council will always have the policy decision on where to expend resources. But absolutely, it could change.
In terms of the financing, we're not married to public-private partnerships. We can still do bonds when they come.
We're open to any combination.
Okay. And last question on the GPS technology. I'm assuming that is for all emergency response vehicles, EMS and police as well, or just fire?
I assume anybody that would respond to Code 3 on calls that could utilize that technology, absolutely.
And would this be the driver of the vehicle would be able to initiate the device, or do they have to call in and have it done?
I don't think there's any calling to it. I don't know how the technology works per se.
Okay.
The technology, we already use a signal preemption device that was installed many years ago. There's a lot of the intersections that have gone down due to maintenance issues, and those devices are no longer available on the market. This GPS device, I know similar devices, just already knows that once the unit's selected and is responding, it knows the suggested route, so it'll already make changes to those signals on that way. So that's how that's done. It's done automatically. Nobody has to, hit something, enter something, push something. It's done automatically.
Thank
That's
you.
exactly right.
Yeah, but I can tell you a lot of those light green areas, it's about traffic flow and congestion in the city of Austin. If everybody's moving the same direction, we get there a lot quicker.
Mr. Levy?
On downtown, it's labor intensive, firefighter intensive. Getting to the front door for a medical emergency, no big deal because you have elevators that are working. If the fire's on the 37th floor, you need apparatus next to the hydrants and standpipes. But anybody here that's in reasonably good shape would have a very difficult time carrying a 90-pound bundle of hose while also wearing a Scott air pack and also bunker gear. It requires a lot of manpower, and it's not there. They're responding more apparatus now on what they call a high-rise alarm, but still, you need firefighters there more than apparatus, and you need them there as soon as possible. And they're not there. We just don't have them. We have the high rises, we have a lot of people, but we don't have adequate fire service.
I'm curious, do y'all have an estimate on what it would cost to upgrade the GPS system in place?
I don't have an estimate, but in your literature, there was a request for that sort of information from Councilmember Morrison several years ago. And it seems to me like the estimate is a little low, but that's why we're asking the city manager to research the equipment, get us a cost, and report back.
Yeah, that is one technology that would impact system-wide.
Sure. And could it be implemented relatively easily based on today's technology if the funding was there?
It seems like nothing is very easy to do, but the technology is there. I mean, our GPSs on our phones can get us to where we need to be. I would assume the technology is implementation, would be relatively quick to do, but relative is a broad term.
If you look in your packets on that information from Councilmember Morrison a couple of years ago, it talks a little bit about what it would take to implement it, and it seems like some of the stepping stones are in place from transportation to do it. So some work has been kind of marched forward that way, but it has the final part needs to be completed.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I'd be looking for a motion to support this resolution.
I make a motion, but I wanted to add one additional request as part of it, which is money for improvement in dispatch. How would you like to do that? I'll make a motion, but I think we need some additional, two or three different additional sentences. Would it be better? How do you do that for me?
Well, that's a completely different subject, which we've not heard a presentation on.
Well,
And
Are you talking about the 911 side of that
Yeah, where,
bar chart? Or,
compressing response time, there is an opportunity to compress response time if we have, if you don't want it in, it's fine. But I think
it should be a separate issue that because we've talked about this before, we haven't really.
that's fine. It's
Okay.
up to the chair.
So, anyways, do you?
Motion.
Okay.
I second.
Second, Daniela. All in favor? Against? Unanimously approved. Good luck.
Great
Thank you, Commissioners.
presentation.
Appreciate it.